Welcome to SEPSA Talk. I am Evans Apia Kisi, the host of SEPSA Talk. SEPSA is Center for Better Society Advocacy and Research Africa. SEPSA Africa is a non-profit organization that believes in a better society for all. We in SEPSA Africa believe that a better society begins with you and I. Hashtag, a better society begins with me. For more information, please log on to www.sepsaafrica.org. Please follow us on the various social media platforms: YouTube, SEPSA Talk, Facebook at SEPSA Africa, Instagram, SEPSA Africa, and Twitter at SEPSA Africa. Like always, today we bring you another interesting discussion on the topic hourly rate and a night economy in Ghana, a possibility. The era of poor working conditions among most Ghanaian professionals has been a current trend, but we direct attention here to the current wage or salary structure in Ghana. Wages or salaries in Ghana are measured only in daily terms. In this episode of SEPSA Talk, we consider the opportunities and challenges of Ghana implementing an hourly wage structure as seen in most global north, or what we describe as the developed countries. In addition, we unpack good practices in managing the evening and late night economy in Ghana. And to help us deal with such an important issue are Mr. Solomon Atta. He's a policy advocate. He holds a master's degree in public policy and global affairs from the University of British Columbia, Canada. His special focus is also on resources, energy, and sustainability. He also holds BA in political science from the University of Ghana, Legon. Key positions occupied includes UBC AMS Sustainability Project Fund Administrator. In 2019, he was also the Greener City Initiative Scholar for the city of Vancouver. And between 2012 to 2018, he was a budget analyst at the Local Government Service of Ghana. I must say it's a pleasure to host you, Mr. Solomon Atta. Welcome to SEPSA Talk, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Evans, and it's a pleasure to be on your show today.
Great. And then our second guest is our own Rexford Kweku Esiama. He's currently a lecturer in energy economics in the Department of Sustainable Energy and Resources at the University of Environment and Sustainable Development, Somenya in Ghana. He's also a doctoral researcher at the DSI NRF Sashi Industrial Development University of Johannesburg, South Africa. He holds MPhil in economics from the University of Ghana and a Bachelor of Science in Economics from the Central University, Ghana. I must say it's always a pleasure to host you. Welcome once again to SEPSA Talk, Mr. Rexford Kweku Esiama.
Thanks, Evans. It's a pleasure to be back.
Great. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for making time to join the discussion here on SEPSA Africa, as we always do this SEPSA Talk. Those of you joining us via Zoom, we're grateful. And those of you also via Facebook, don't forget we are streaming live on Facebook. And so if you have any questions concerning the topic tabled for discussion today, feel free to share them and our guest here would answer them for you. Great. So we would start right away. And I would like to begin with you, Solomon Atta. And particularly also, I have to say that you have written a very beautiful article, which is on modern Ghana. Maybe you could tell us more about that article. But in that article, which also inspired this discussion to some extent, you did mention about Ghana. One of the ways to address the unemployment challenges in Ghana would be to consider an hourly wage instead of the daily wage that we have. So the question I ask, or I begin with you, is that is there really a difference between the daily and the hourly measurement of wage or salary? Because for some, you can easily calculate your hourly wage from the daily wage that is measured in Ghana. Is there really a difference? Just briefly.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Evans, thank you for having me on your show once again. And I would start by saying that our inability to actually measure our wages in hourly terms is one of the single contributions of the unemployment, high unemployment rate in Ghana, and particularly the graduate unemployment rate that we are facing in Ghana. And the reason is that there are significant differences between wages in terms versus measuring wages on daily terms. Now, one of the differences is that we assume that all employees, have to work 8 hours a day. And we also assume that all employees for 8 hours a day. It makes it very difficult to measure employees' effort against output and appropriately reward them. So we notice that about 90% of our economy is in the informal sector, where they don't implement wages standards to the core. And so people just reward, or if like employers reward employees how they feel they should reward them. And of course, we are a liberal economy, and every employer is seeking to make profit. What that means is that in the quest to make profit, employees try as much as possible to pay peanuts to employees. And I'll give you an example. For example, around 2014, my brother finished University of Ghana with BSc in petrochemicals. Now, he actually applied for a job at Joy Standard, and I want to mention names here because I know it's true. As a graduate at the time, he was paid just about 200 Ghana cedis. If you compare that to the Western societies where wages are measured in hourly terms, the difference here is that when government of the Western societies announce that they have created jobs, they know that every job that springs out of the economy is able to pay people a certain minimum wage. And in the United States, I know the federal minimum wage is just about $7.5 per hour. Here in Canada, you could get it up to $15 per hour. And so once they mention that they have created a job, they know that any individual, being a graduate or even non-graduate, benefiting from that, these new jobs being created, are going to get a certain minimum amount of money, income that is good enough to take care of their basic expenses like rent and what have you. Now, last year in June, the National Tripartite Committee announced the minimum wages in Ghana. And Dr. Evans, you will not believe that in Ghana, the minimum wage is $12.53, cedis per day. Now, if you break that into hourly terms, that is about 1.6 cedis an hour. It means that if somebody is to rely on 1.6 cedis an hour, we assume, or government assume, that that is the contribution, that's the effort, that is the production that you're able to put out within an hour. And right from the onset, you will know that there is a huge gap here where employers are trying as much as possible to cheat employees. Now, there was a research by the Danish Trade Union, and it was looking at labor market in Ghana, and they discovered that about 90% of the Ghanaian economy, which is in the informal sector, actually underpay wages. And so here, if we are not able to migrate into an hourly wage, what it means is that people are going to be always continue to be paid a low wage, and no graduate would like to take employment from the informal sector. Now, assuming that we have a very minimum standard of wages in hourly terms, assuming we have, say, 5 cedis per hour, if you worked for 8 hours a day, that is about 40 cedis. If you work for 24 days per week, you are crossing almost 1,000 cedis a day. For a graduate who has no experience and wants to work for 2 or 3 years in order to get the experience that he needs to get a dream job, this could be a very good start for them. But as we have it now, no graduate wants to take an employment in the informal sector. And so in a situation where they are even engaged in the informal sector, they still consider themselves as unemployed until they settle in a formal sector job. So that is one of the reasons why we are experiencing high levels of graduate unemployment in Ghana, because the wages our inability to measure wages in hourly terms is really demotivation to employees and particularly for graduates to accept job in the informal sector. So that is my preliminary observation. And I know as we dive into it, there will be more issues coming up.
Sure. Thank you very much. Thanks. And definitely I'll come to you, Rex. But so one of the things you already mentioned is that the daily means of calculating the wages, it's a major contributory factor to the low wages that we experience in Ghana. And you already talked about an hourly wage in Ghana around on average, 1.6 Ghana cedis. And you said it's the major reasons for the high unemployment rate. But my question is it not lack of job opportunities? Because as we know, most Ghanaians, even though they are not happy with their wages, are willing to accept any kind of job or any available job, regardless of the age. And so how do we, juxtapose the low wages to the high unemployment rates? Because how do you explain that?
Yes, when the Western countries tweet about the jobs that they have created in a year or in a quarterly basis or even on a monthly basis, Dr. Evans, it's not like it's a super normal job that you are creating. It's actually jobs as restaurant workers, as cleaners, as shop operators, or if you like customer service advisors and all of that. I mean, in a Ghanaian term, these are all very extreme low standard wage jobs. But here in the Western societies, once they mention that they have created jobs, like I said from the beginning, they are very much assured that anybody engaged in these kind of jobs are at least paid a certain minimum wage. So it doesn't matter whether you're a graduate or whether you haven't attended school before, everybody is willing to take any job that comes their way. Unlike in Ghana, where graduates are a bit more selective about the job that they want to do. And like I said, many people will tell you that they are unemployed. Meanwhile, they are engaged in one form of economic activities or another. Now, because the wages are extremely low at that point, there's no measurement in terms of hours. There's no way to assess their outputs versus the income that they are receiving from that particular job. They assume that they are unemployed until they settle on something that meets their income. So basically, that is a really very significant difference between a wage regime where it's measured in daily terms and that of hourly terms. And like I said, employers are always looking for supernormal profit. So they will try as much as possible to give you anything that's anything that they can offer. And just because there are high levels of unemployment, if you're a graduate, you will not refuse, you accept it, but really it will not meet your the income standard that you're looking for, at least to live a minimum standard of of lifestyle that you want as a graduate.
Thank you very much. I think I get the drift very well. I mean, on the other hand, if these jobs would pay very well, then even though graduates might feel that it's their profession or their qualification does not commensurate with such things, they probably might still compromise and do the job if the wage is high. But because of the low wages, then they are better off staying at home instead of working.
Absolutely.
Rex, what do you make of that with the input from Solomon trying to strike the difference between the hourly wage and the daily wage that we have, mainly contributing to low wages and also high unemployment rate? What's your take on the difference between an hourly wage and the daily wage structure?
Yeah, thanks again, Evans, and it's good to be back. Okay, so I can appreciate everything that Solomon says in terms of the difference between the hourly wage rate but fundamentally, as an economist, I almost always question the price of labor or the cost at which labor is employed. And several theories have been propounded in terms of what is the right price to pay for labor, that contributes for a firm or for someone who owns production or productive systems. Now, as much as possible, I think that it is important to clearly understand that this whole concept about unemployment and what happens in the labor market, like all other markets, are manufactured. And this is strictly going away from mainstream economics that tells you that, look, people go, you finish as a graduate, you go into go out there into the market looking for a job, and you need to present your credentials, see what is available, and then you get it. Unlike most markets, in the labor markets, the forces of supply and demand are actually reversed. So in the labor market, those who are the suppliers of labor are actually those who are looking for the jobs. And those who are demanding the labor are actually the employers. And so when it comes to the distinction between whether to pay, on an hourly basis or to pay, in terms of salaries, what happens is it comes to what is the true cost that the employer is willing to pay for an extra unit of labor, or what is the real cost basically of bringing in an extra hand. Now, like you rightly said, if the employers are not paying the right price, and they still want to meet their profit margins, because that is the fundamental motive, then it just goes to say that it's also a question of whether the revenues that are being made are actually satisfactory, right? Because if they pay you on if you wanted to pay someone on an hourly basis, and this was standard across board and accepted by the government, which I'm sure the Western societies have, then no employer has an excuse not to do that, right? And at the same time, too, you are able to fully accept that, based on the person's credentials, this is the true value of labor, and you are paying the correct price, right? Now, the concept of a salary is not necessarily to fully pay the actual value of the labor. Salary is paid as a contribution. The employer gives you what they feel is your contribution to their production or to their firm, right? And that is where sometimes it seems to get confusing. So nowhere in the world, anyway, let me just speak for Ghana, but as far as Ghana is concerned, it is almost always going to be difficult to say that if you take a salary, then that is actually the true reflection of what you should get. You are actually worth more than whatever it is that you are being paid, because the salary itself is a contribution. It's the employer feels that this is what you have, this is what I should pay you for what you have contributed to the output in my firm. With that being said, the only way we can pick one over the other, right, is when we're able to fully answer the question of whether at a standard level, the actual price of labor is actually being respected or being reflected. And that takes me back to some of these heterodox theories that tell us that free markets are not as free as we think they should be, or markets themselves have been created and imposed. And a good reference point is 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism. And that's an interesting book that will open your mind for you to understand that this whole concept of unemployment and the labor market distortions, all of those things are actually a creation. Whose creation are they? Every society and every economy is governed by a system which we can refer to as the government now. So ultimately, that government is the one that will call the price and decide that this is the rate at which so and so should be paid. It also depends on the government's ability to be able to manage the other burdens that come out of whatever arrangements it has had, because the government is the largest spender, right? And it's also supposed to be the largest entity that should make revenue. They ultimately will decide how much they are willing to pay for labor, and every other private entity will take a cue from what they do. As it is now, if the government is not paying the actual price, you do not expect private employers to follow. And if the government does not pay an hourly wage, you do not expect private employers to follow. What does that mean? It means that people are now going to be looking elsewhere out of the standard original labor markets, right, to engage in other activities that they feel can bring in additional income to them to compensate them for their value, right? So ultimately, the discussion between the hourly and then the monthly sort of structure depends on who calls the price. And what I'm saying here is that if the government that's going to call the price and they have not been able to give us an actual price, right, then it makes it a difficult conversation. In a Western society that Solomon is referring to, the government has actually been able to set that price, right? So they know that whether you have a degree or not, if you work in a restaurant, this is the standard rates that you charge. And that's easier for them to work with based on a certain level of identification. We don't have that in Ghana, right? So from a Ghanaian perspective, it's easier to say, okay, instead of, no, there are no standards, there are no standard rates, and there is some sort of a calculation of a minimum wage, but I'm not sure how the Ghana Statistical Service goes about doing that. But the easiest way to do it is to say, okay, out of the revenues that have come in for a firm, for any firm, at the end of the month, you must decide how much you pay the employee based on what you feel is the contribution of the employee. So I could say that the hourly stuff will be better, but my key question there would be, what is the actual price of labor? And does the government actually feel like it's in a position to call that out?
Interesting perspective out there. So in summary, you also agree with Solomon that the hourly measurement would be better than the daily measurement that we have now. But the key question here is, what will be the price and how will the price of labor be determined? And is the government in a position to do that? But Rex, so do you see any negative consequences? Of course, we believe that government is in the position to do that. But from you as an economist, do you see any negative consequences if government decides to implement this hourly wage policy? Is it something you think is beyond us? Because our next questions will be to see how we can implement that policy and then what will be the challenges and opportunities. But just briefly, I mean, from what you have discussed, do you think it's beyond Ghana to do that?
It's actually not beyond us. I mean, there are some serious economic constraints that the government faces, and that is why it cannot move into some of these things. Ordinarily, the government should be able to do that.
All right.
So when we compare Western and African governments, we know the difference. But just to answer your question, it's not beyond us. It is something that can be done easily if the government has enough fiscal space.
Then thank you very much, because then this is exactly what we are about to do. And Solomon, I know you have suggested ways with which you think government can do that, but maybe I would probably we should start with the implementation of these hourly wage if we are to do it. What would be your position, Solomon, if I should start with you, before we even come to the opportunities and challenges?
I think government is in the position to do this. What we are asking for is not as if government should begin to increase wages astronomically. No, that's not the point here. The point is that even with this current wage structure, the government can still stick to the wage standard of all government workers and break them into hourly terms. Now that, like Doc said, that is going to inform the private sector automatically to follow suit, because I mean the government is taking the lead and the private sector will follow suit. Now, if you look at the private sector wages versus the public sector wages, there's a significant difference. And then, like I said, when I graduated from University of Ghana in 2011, between 2011 and 2012, I was engaged in some private staff, But I never considered myself as employed until I settled on, the government public sector job. And it's the same with so many other graduates, actually. So if they are looking up to the government to take this lead, I mean, it's just about the government, even with its current wage structure, implementing this kind of policy to measure employees' wages and salaries in hourly terms. Now, that also comes with the number of hours that government would decide as a full-time. And I think in Ghana it's 40 hours, which of course is the same as what the Western societies practice. The other point is that it is also able to help us to determine who is working overtime. And actually people who want to work on part-time basis. Otherwise, we don't virtually have that system in Ghana. I mean, let's take an industry like domestic workers, like what we call household. They work virtually 24/7 a day, and no one is measuring that. It's just about, well, you are my household, and they work at any time without actually measuring their output, measuring the number of hours that it is taking them, and so on and so forth. So I think it's not any super policy, or it's not anything that is going to really overwhelm government, but rather the government, we just want the government to take the lead, break its current wage structure into hourly terms, and then the private sector will follow suit based on a new minimum wage that the government sets for the private sector. Or, I mean, if a minimum wage is set, actually it's not only for the private sector, it's also for the government to follow suit. But we all know that minimum wage usually applies to the private sector, or if you like, the informal sector, the leadership. But when we get into the challenges and how we can implement this without any hedges, I think there are a lot of things to say about that, because I know it could face a lot of opposition. And I know the US story when in the early 1930s, efforts were made to implement hourly wage. Even the Supreme Court in 1932 struck it down because they felt like it's going to overwhelm employers. The cost of cost of wages and salaries are going to rise up. Of course, that is also a major, labor is a major factor of production, and that will really bring hardship to the entire economy. But eventually, when President Roosevelt won election in 1936, in his campaign, he made a major promise, and in 1938, this kind of policy was implemented. So there are steps, and for me, I have always said that we have no reason to fail, or we have no reason to practice the best or do the follow suit with the best practice, because there are so many different countries that have implemented some of these best practices policies that we can follow suit. We can learn from them. We can learn from their mistakes. We can learn from their successes. It's just about having the political will. And I tell you, Evans, that in 2024, any political party that makes this a major campaign promise and have an implementation strategy are going to win the heart of many Ghanaians, because we know how many people are suffering in the informal sectors or in the private sectors. And like I said, until they land in a public sector job, they still feel like they're unemployed. So it's about government following suit with even its current standard of wage rates, and the private sector will follow suit. That's what we are asking for.
All right, thank you very much, Solomon. So this is not any big thing that cannot be done. So you say that it can start gradually. Also take a look at the number of hours that is that Ghanaians have to work, and then perhaps not necessarily jumping the wage to some astronomical figure, as you put it, but to start on a very small basis. And I think the private sectors would catch up. When I come back to you, I would ask you to now tell us what are some of the challenges that might be faced in an attempt to implement this, and of course also the opportunities as well as the way forward. Rex, like Solomon said, perhaps it's already a tip for people who are aspiring to be presidents in Ghana, that if this is one of the campaign messages, it might win the heart or the support of most Ghanaians. I guess perhaps those in the formal sector. And so for you, what should be the way forward in terms of implementing this very important policy? Briefly, what do you think could be the way forward in an attempt to do that on the side of the government?
Well, I mean, these type of things, if you're gonna introduce an hourly rate, you kind of need to have a better appreciation of what type of skills are available. And I don't think that we have that yet. But South Africa has something called a critical skills list that kind of seeks to like outline the key critical skills that are needed, but also um, that is actually based on an assessment of the skills that are already available. Okay, and Ghana will have to come to a point where we are able to peg a standard rate for whatever skill it is that is available. So if the person is a building technician, this is the rate available. And in the Western world, they have those answers, right? So that you are not you are able to pay what is actually due to labor. So someone with a PhD will have their rates the same way someone with an MPhil, MSc or whatever it is will have a rate, because the universities know that these qualifications are not all on the same level, and they know the capacities that they provide to every student. They should be able to tell what the students can do. So that should actually be done. And that goes back to some of these issues, that some of these tensions in the labor market currently about a market premium and whatnot. These are all based on a labor market saving that actually should have been done regularly, for people to be able to appreciate the fact that if you have certain skills, this is what is available to you, and then you can do your planning, right? And then you can also do your own forecasting. However, the burden on government has actually prevented governments from doing some of these things over time. Because imagine that, say you work in a restaurant and you are projected to earn like 10 cedis an hour. You can make your projections for the whole month, and at the end of the month, what happens if your projection beats what your employer gives you at the end of the month? There's going to be a problem, right? So to avoid some of these things, they said, okay, fine, just kick it back to a salary sort of thing, and then let the employer pay what they feel is due the employee, and you avoid some of those issues that come along with calculations and stuff like that. This is actually not to say that the salary system is better. It just comes along with lower projections and saves the employer the trouble of having to go through the process of actually paying the full price. The right thing to do is to pay the hourly rate, and that should be based on standardization, and that standardization will come out of a labor market survey, which should normally have been done regularly, like how we have the census and those things. Those things should have been done regularly. That way a market premium itself can be provided, so that people who have specific qualifications can identify them and then work with that. That is actually one unique opportunity that will allow us to get to the implementation of the hourly rate. Then we can avoid the type of strikes that we are seeing now. Because if the nurses go on strike, there is the same problem. If the doctors go on strike, it's the same problem. I hear this morning, I saw that the meteorological agency people, those who read the weather patterns at the airport, they have gone on strike because of a similar issue, right? Conditions of service, etc., etc. So generally, we can say, and I'm not a labor economist, the labor economists keep writing and mentioning that there are structural rigidities in the labor market. And it all comes from some of these things. You implement a labor market survey, and you have a clear idea of what is due which person based on their qualification. And then based on that, you can come up with standard rates and pay what the hourly wage rate is. After you do that, everything else is, because you need the employee to work so that you can make revenue. You understand? So whatever happens at the end of the month is a secondary matter. What matters is that the person shows up to work and contributes their quota. And once they show up to work and you pay them what is their due, you have done your part. And you, the employer, you can take a profit at the end of the month.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rex, for adding more of the theoretical aspect. I think you sum it up that one way to do this would be, in my understanding, to implement a labor market survey where we would be able to determine the hourly rate for different types of labor that we have. Now, when you were talking about it, of course, to me, and I guess to our viewers and listeners, this is not something so difficult where we can put up 2-3 labor economists to, do such a survey. But my question was that, what about the single spine? I mean, as a layman, I was wondering, didn't the single spine address this kind of problem? Is it not, don't we have it already? Is it different from what you talked about in South Africa, where they have this critical skill list? But what about our single spine?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, the part of the agitations that we are having now, currently in the labor market, because of some of these things that the single spine sought to correct. So the single spine salary structure was to say that you are bringing everybody onto a standardized sort of level where it is possible to be able to pinpoint how much a police officer will make from an administrator in the ministries, right? And how much, what's it called, a bailiff in the court can get, because these are all people who are employed by the government, right? But to do that, they had to conduct the labor market survey, and out of that come up with a market premium, which they will say, okay, based on your skills or based on your qualification, this is what you are getting, right? The problem always, as always, with our beloved country, Ghana, is that even though we have good brains and skills who can come up with all of these fantastic things, the implementation is poor. And because of poor implementation, different categories of people in the labor force have not feel like they are aggrieved. They have not gotten what has been due them. So since 2012, 2013 till now, there are still several aspects of people on government payroll who feel like they're underpaid, and they're actually right, because if you can go as far as coming up with a market premium and doing the labor survey, why not implement it? And if you are going to implement it, then you are literally getting to a point where you can say, for this particular qualification, this is the premium I've put on it, and I can pay you this for this hour. Having an hourly rate is actually beneficial for the employer, because then you can actually track progress and see
exactly.
Yeah, so it makes more sense to have an hourly sort of. But then once again, we go back to the fiscal challenges that government has. It's already overburdened with its own sort of expenditure, some of which we can question, but some of which is necessary, right? The payment to statutory funds, etc. So already the fiscal space is sort of limited. If we can solve that problem, in the course of dealing with this, I think that helps.
Go ahead.
Yeah, but until such a point as these fiscal issues and these labor market premiums and things are implemented, we'll still have the same sort of cycle. A strike, labor union says that they are going on strike, and then government has to run around and be putting fires and be sending them to court here and there, trying to compel them to go back to work, etc., etc. No, it's the same old story. We're running an hourly rate like how we've been discussing so far, right? And everything was standard. Then you know that this is what you are getting for, and if you are going to do the overtime, then that one, it is the employee's choice to do the overtime. But as it is now, if you are being paid a salary, you can't clearly tell which time is your overtime or not. And for some employers, if they call you and they say you should do something, and you don't do it because you say it is weekend or whatnot, and the person is aggrieved, at the end of the month, he tell you that this is what I feel like paying because I told you to do something and you didn't do it.
Thank you very much, Rex. And I think you've really reiterated most of the important points that Solomon already talked about. And I'm happy that around here, there's a huge consensus that this hourly rate is very important. And I think that it's long overdue that we deal with this. One of the things both of you said that caught my attention is the fact that it would not only reduce the unemployment that you talked about, but it would enhance productivity. And I think if a critical look at that, then perhaps government should not be too worried about, the physical deficit and the likes that you talked about, because once productivity is increased, at least it also helps to generate more revenue. Thank you very much. Just to read some few messages. If you are just joining us today, we are having a very interesting discussion here on hourly wage, salary, or income that we have in Ghana. We would also talk a little bit about the night economy and how to, manage such an economy to also help to generate a bit of income. And some few messages. One from Abraham says, why is it that Ghana, if you're employed in the formal sector and manage to engage yourself in another job, which you can earn something at the same time, I guess, the employees and co-workers will frustrate you till you drop one. I can't think far. I guess if we have an hourly wage, like it's been said here, you would be able to know how many hours you have, and other our benefits that you could also get. One from SA Kofi also says, I think education on this issue is important. The informal sector loses a lot for not paying well. If employees feel the opportunity cost of losing a job is low, they shirk the job. Otherwise, the employer needs to do serious monitoring. How much will Solomon Kwesi Atta propose per hour? How will the hourly rate be affected by the instability of the cedi? Okay, so just to read one long message again on Facebook, I think then I come to you to maybe answer the question, what you would propose per hour, maybe both of you. Sorry to put you in a very tight corner, Rex, but what you would propose, for an hour. I think it would be difficult, but I'll allow you to say something about it. So Emmanuel Ochrebuachi says it is possible to do that and must be done. Apart from trying to solve the unemployment situation, it would also increase the productivity levels. We talked about this. I was very happy when the government in the inception of NACOP said it was going to use the clocking system to measure productivity, but became disappointed when it was abandoned. Supervision in our part of this world is very appalling. I have worked in the public sector before and know what I am talking about. Robot systems must be put in place to monitor productivity. It's as fresh as today when ex-President Kufuor, the introduction of the single spine salary policy, said Ghanaians pretend to be working, but perhaps they are not working. So quickly, what would you propose, Solomon? I don't know whether you find that question to be that easy, especially when we know there are different skill sets and the likes. But anyway, what would you propose? Maybe as a minimum, because you did the calculation and said currently looking at our minimum wage is 1.6 cedis per hour. So what would you propose per hour looking at our minimum wage? If you could unmute your microphone.
Yeah, thanks. So, it's not a straightforward 5 cedis, 2 cedis answer. My implementation strategy, or what I will propose, will be that we need to determine that in the next 2 years, in the next 3 years, in the next 5 years, we want to reach 10 cedis an hour wage for each worker in Ghana, or for the minimum paid worker in Ghana. And then we will determine what will be the incremental level each year. So we don't have to necessarily jump into 5 cedis an hour, or 10 cedis an hour, or even 2 cedis an hour. I think that will be a huge shock to employers. And of course, that will bring a lot of opposition, because of course, it's going to increase the cost of production. But what we can do is to just have the basic structures in place first, and then determine that every year we are going to go up by, say, 50 pesos or 1 cedi. And then gradually, employers will have the space to adjust to the levels that we want to see probably in the next 5 years or 4 years of a particular government administration. So it's very difficult to mention a figure at this point, but we can get to where we want to get to in an incremental with an incremental strategy. But even to determine that, it depends. Like Rex said earlier, it takes a lot of survey. We need to see the skills level of the kind of various kinds of labor we have in the market, and determine what level should it be. Nurses, what level should they be, so that whether they are working in the private sector or in the public sector, they still get that same kind of wage, Sure. So it's going to have different levels. But my point here is even the minimum paid worker in Ghana, how much should they receive? I think if I had a choice, I say no one deserves less than 5 cedis an hour. And you see, there's and Dr. Rex knows better. He's an economist, and the marginal returns of labor. If you don't need me, you don't employ me. So, for example, when I worked in Nigeria, I know Mondays in Nigeria markets, and the whole city becomes full of people who are trading. And so you would know as an employer that on this day, probably I need 2 extra hands. I need 3 extra hands to work 8 hours a day for me. But what about Tuesday? What about Wednesday? That there's no demand for the kind of stuff that you are selling. Do you still have to employ people just because you have to employ them and keep them on a fixed wage per month. You get them as and when you need them. The employee is also much flexible to jump over jobs when he thinks that, well, this job is not satisfying my, living expenses or my income. You can, here we have about people working on 2 or 3 jobs per week, jumping from one job to other, even within the same day. That is the kind of system and efficiency we could have. Employers will employ as and when they need them. Employees will have the flexibility to move on to different jobs to meet their incomes level. And of course, the ultimate beneficiary is the government, because productivity is going to increase. Government revenues from income taxes and all of that are going to increase. Now,
very well.
Time is not on our side. Otherwise, I'll go into some other implementation.
Let me get the reaction of Rex. Briefly, I'm sure you might also say that it's a bit difficult, but where would you peg it?
Yeah, because you're putting us in a difficult position. Some of these things need to be. But okay, I'll just say two things must. You need to protect whatever it is you pay. You need to protect the people against inflation, because that is another variable that can wipe away the productive power of incomes or whatever it is you pay them on a daily basis. So if you're going to pay them something, then make sure that it is something that can protect them against the daily inflation rates. And then also you also make sure that you give them something that can guarantee them a certain level of social protection on a daily basis. Because remember that we are discussing all of this in an economy that is supposed to guarantee the people a certain basic level of living, standard of living, and put it that way. And so they should have enough. Like, what I'm saying is, if you are going to pay someone a rate and they cannot buy food for themselves, it doesn't make any sense. If you're going to pay someone a rate and they cannot afford to sleep in a guest house on a daily basis, then that doesn't make any sense. You get it? All right. So if I had to call a figure, I would start from $10 an hour for entry level position, and this is probably someone who has like an HND, and progressing onwards like that, taking into consideration the inflation rates and other costs that people have to consider. Yeah, and I would start from that point. It's not weird, because like Solomon said, they do like $12, and it can go as high as $15 depending on the qualification. But at the end of the day, $10 is a starting point, and then over time, employers can adjust it based on the inflation rates that persist.
I thank you very much, and I also like one of the things that you said, just to add my perspective also, with the fact that the minimum should be able to take care of inflation. I think even in the food and agricultural sector, there's something that is being done by most people, something called living income or living wage. So the calculation is done in such a way that smallholder producers or farmers are supposed to receive income or wage that commensurates with the living standard of that country. And I would also say to Albert that we could start from there by doing a calculation to find out what the average Ghanaian would spend. And then that could be the basis for the hourly wage that we probably. So Solomon, briefly, maybe in about 5-10 minutes, I know you have a lot. Let's look at some of the opportunities, challenges, and we put everything together again, implementing strategies for such a wonderful policy if Ghana is supposed to take a look at it.
Yeah, thank you. I will start with the challenges first. Of course, the fear is that it could increase the cost of labor. If you jump people's wage from, say, 1.6 cedis an hour to, say, 5 cedis an hour, that is almost about over 400 or so %, increment, which could be crazy, which could be a huge shock. So the challenge is that you're going to have employers opposing this kind of policy, businessmen opposing this kind of policy. And then, of course, it could also be politicized. But of course, we are talking about in the context of Ghana. Everything that the NPP wants and NDC opposes, everything that the NDC wants, NPP opposes. So it doesn't really matter which government starts it, but I know that it's going to face a huge political opposition. But opposition is not always bad because we get a different perspective of whatever government wants to really shape the policies better. So, like I said in the US example, even at one point, the government itself was against it because of course, the judiciary is part of government. So the Supreme Court struck it down because of some of these kind of fears. And at the same time, we could see a spike in inflation because assuming we are raising the minimum wage from 1.6 cities to say 5 cities, the income level of people are going to increase. And all of a sudden, we have more people who have more income, like the basic of income, inflation, more income chasing fewer goods, which will spike up prices. So,
initially, I thought it was my.
In terms of implementation, I think there need to be assurances by government to employees, of course.
If our producer could reach out to Solomon to fix his internet,
we have presently seen how I can hear you. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Let me log out and log in again.
We have some hitches in your internet. I don't know whether you want to look at it. All right, great. So then let's continue with you, Rex, so that we put everything together. I know you've already stated some of the physical deficit that we have in Ghana, but beyond that, what are putting everything together, challenges, opportunities, as far as this very great policy would be?
Okay, thanks. So the challenges I've already said are the fiscal conditions of government, but the opportunities are, the chance to be able to, for people to do better planning, to do the tracking. People can clearly identify. The labor can actually choose which sector they want to work in, or they want to focus on based on the standard rates. You get it? So you don't have a situation where someone studied IT and is hoping to be, an IT consultant, but because there's no job, they want to go and join the prison service, stuff like that. So then you're able to prevent this type of thing where people don't value the education that they get and the qualifications that they have, and instead are chasing the rates that are being offered by employers based on the availability. People should have the chance to know that, listen, if you are going to study, say, cyber forensics, for example, by the time you come out, you already have an idea of the rates that your qualification can earn, right? So then they know what to expect once they come out, and they can follow that standard procedure. At the same time, I think that it also gives an opportunity for the government to also, earn more, because I kept asking this question when we started talking about the e-levy, and I'm still interested in that. Do you have to pay people more so that you can benefit from the taxes that they pay you, or do you expect them to pay you more taxes so that you can then benefit and then pay them more income? This question about the direction of the causality or the direction of flow goes back to, a fundamental model, which we call the circular flow of income from an economic perspective, which is that it is the same labor that makes up the household that goes out to work in the firm, or that goes out to work for the company. For the company to make enough money and income, to pay its taxes to the government, but the human being or the labor itself
Okay, it looks like you can hear Dr. Evans. Can you hear me, Rex?
Yeah, I can hear you. I couldn't hear him. Okay, let me just.
Absolutely. I know we've always said that you need to give people more money so they can spend, so that it will benefit the economy. And thank you very much, Rex. So, Solomon, I think you were making a point about some of the opportunities and challenges. If you could continue from there.
I think the internet problem is from his end.
Hello.
Yeah,
sorry. I also
can
had a
you
problem
hear me
with my
this time around?
internet.
Is it okay?
Funny. Yes.
Hello, Dr. Evans.
I
Is it
don't
okay
have a
now?
problem.
Can you hear me?
Great. Anyway, let me read some messages. If you are just joining us today, SEPSA Talk, and we are discussing a very interesting topic, hourly versus daily measurement of wage that we have in Ghana. We would also touch.
Okay.
Hello, Solomon.
I think it's your side because I can hear.
At least, Rex, you can hear me, right?
Yeah, Evans, I can hear you.
Struggling a little bit. Yes, I think it's okay. Go ahead.
Yes, I can hear you. I think the internet problem is from my end. I can hear you. Yeah.
So please go ahead.
Yes. So earlier on, I mentioned the need. I mentioned the need for extensive consultation and assurances of employees that this kind of policy is not going to increase the cost of labor.
Right. So please
one other way.
Ahead then.
Yes. One other way we can look at this whole implementation is looking at the government sector. I mean, the government is the biggest spender in the economy. So, for example, this year, the government has budgeted to spend about 135 billion Ghana cedis. And out of this, about 37 billion is earmarked for interest payments, about 35 million is for compensation. And then when it comes to goods and services, it's about 9 billion. And capital expenditure is about 16 billion. Now, here's what we can do. Government can decide that any employee who is going to work under my budget, or if who is going to benefit, in implementing my budget, should be paid in hourly terms based on the new structure that comes out. And like I said, the government is the biggest spender in the economy. And actually, all of the people, if all of the people working for government projects and programs, and even those that are not directly employed by the government, are to be paid in hourly terms, that is going to be a huge migration from the government end. Because this time around, we are not looking at those who are on the paid official government wage alone. We are looking at every other person working directly or indirectly on a government project. And so that eventually would migrate about 60% of the employees that we have in Ghana. And then the private sector will follow suit. So if we are able to define the wages and not increasing it from the onset, but actually have a target for, say, 5 years, in 5 years, where we should get to, and government taking the lead with its direct wage payment and indirect wage payment through all of the contracts that is awarded, and the people who benefit from those contracts and the people who work under those contracts come into hourly wage system. I think we might be able to implement that. I don't think it's too much difficult. Otherwise, like you said, Evans, we will continue to pretend as if we are working, and employers will also continue to pretend as if they are paying us. Eventually, it is the economy at large that suffers.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Very interesting comments out there, and I think that just as many of you that are listening and watching would be done, because it's a very interesting, far outweigh the challenges or the disadvantages that we might face. And a few messages here again from Facebook. One from Apia Constant said, some company in Ghana pays as low as 300 Ghana cedi per month. Oh, Ghana, I guess. Felix Tetezuta also says, this issue, companies forget top talents benefit your company tremendously. And that is why some companies go very far to do this. productivity goes up, revenue goes up, attrition goes down, hiring is. So I guess he's saying that if we are able to do this, it really, really improves productivity as you are able to attract top talents and people who are willing to stay and also work for you. Kwabnakra says, great discussion. I believe tackling the fundamental problems such as ensuring constant electricity supply, fixing roads, etc., should also be prioritized. Samson in Chimbina says, sorry for the pronunciation of your name, enjoying your discussion. So I think this is very interesting. I'll just come to you, Rex and Solomon, and take your final comments because of our time. We probably would look at the night economy very well next week. The production team will definitely would do that, and maybe we would see if we'll bring the same guest or we'll have different guests to discuss the night economy. But before I come to take your final comments on the way forward regarding the implementation of this such brilliant idea that is the hourly wage and the opportunities that the country is likely to reap from, I wanted to continue with one very long message that was sent to a producer from Facebook. I read part of it, and I just want to continue that when the person said, Ghanaians pretend to be working and government pretends to be paying them. How very true is it today? I never attended any university, but listens a lot to my children who have attended universities. And it can be inferred that productivity of some of the lecturers are below average as pertains to the Americas and European systems. I encourage you and don't rest on your oars. Okay, so I think this is very important, still in the line of productivity. So guys, in conclusion, I would again begin with you, Solomon. What's the way forward, and what would be your, should I say, our wish that this particular issue should be taken more seriously and the way forward as far as payment of hourly wages are concerned?
Thank you, Evans. I think that's far from our independence in 1957. We have pretended for far too long.
Can you hear me, Solomon?
Yes, I can hear you, Evans. Yeah, I was just summing up to say that from independence, we have pretended for far too long. Governments have pretended as if they are paying employees as if we are all working. And if you look at if you consider the margin of unemployment rate among graduates, it's really very high. We need to adopt some sort of policy that will motivate graduates to take employment even in the informal sectors. Otherwise, from independence, we have had various forms of unemployment measures. Really, none of them is solving our unemployment challenges. So for me, dividing, or if you like, measuring wages and productivity in hourly terms, it's much more efficient. The employer is able to determine output and compensate employees and an employee as such. And that's not to say that implementation challenges will not come. They're always going to be implementation challenges. But what I propose is that we do not have to jump the gun. We have to adopt a very gradual process. We have to define the structures first, and then give ourselves up to 5 years to be able to get to where we want to get to as a deserving wage for the minimum paid worker, and of course for all of the various professions that we have. Sorry about the disturbance.
Okay. I don't know.
Don't worry. It's we know it's allowed in such Zoom meetings. All kinds of things to happen. Thank you very much, Solomon, for that wonderful inputs out there. Still instilling a lot of confidence and also hope in the fact that if we are able to do this policy, it's going to, in the long run, benefit the country as a whole. All right, Rex, your concluding remarks.
Thanks, Evans. I'll just say that, if
Hello,
people
Rex, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Rex, please go ahead.
Okay, sure. So my concluding remarks is, an hourly system, obviously is better because we can track progress and see how.
All right, then please go ahead.
Yeah, so I was saying that an hourly system is better because then we can track progress and see the contributions that people are making. But ultimately, we need to ask questions about how much government is willing to pay and what is the premium that government is willing to put on, on labor and people with specific qualifications. Then again, I also think that if people are paid better, they will stay in the country and contribute their quota towards the revenue, situation that we have. The brain drain because of this matter is actually quite serious, because if you come back with a PhD or someone comes back from abroad, the qualification, what the rates that you get here in Ghana is not as encouraging. So they are actually motivated to stay in the West, and that's actually something that the government needs to look at and address going forward. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so thank you so much. Okay, Evans.
Thank you very much, Rex. What a way to end today's show. And I like the very last statement that you made, that if people are really paid.
Okay.
I think it takes, Albert, go ahead and close the show.
Thank you so much. I think it has been a wonderful discussion. And but before we go, I think I will take some few comments from Facebook. Then I wish we could take maybe some 4 minutes, 2 minutes each for Rex, then 2 minutes also for Solomon about what is going on, especially with the strike. With the strike that is ongoing in Ghana. The university teachers have been on strike for, I think, almost a month or more than a month. Just 2 minutes, your take. So one comment from Phillips Asare Per is saying that I support the hourly wages, but on one condition, that if only we can provide good supervision. Then another one from Felix Tete Zuta is saying, Phillips, I don't think you need good supervision. You just need to implement good cultures, trust people, and give them space to work. The fact that you are paying them hourly doesn't mean they have to be working every single minute. At the end of the day, what you need is increased productivity, and productivity is actually better in cultures that give freedom for people to take breaks. Interesting perspective. Then another one from Oba Joseph is saying great discussion. Yeah, so those are the perspectives people are sharing. I don't know if probably you may have something to say about the comment that have been poured, but then if you have something to say, you can just add it to the discussion. Add it to your concluding remarks when we're talking about the university teachers strike. Yes, Rex, please go ahead.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I think this is a matter that strikes the hearts of many who are concerned about the labor reward scheme in Ghana, and particularly those who work. It's also of specific interest to those who have gone out for training in the diaspora and are looking to come back. the truth of the matter is, look, I mean, Ghanaians, I almost always keep saying, like, Ghanaians are like some of the smartest people in the world. Because everywhere I'm born to, anytime I meet Ghanaians, I'm actually marveled at the type of stuff that they do out there, and I wonder why, they wouldn't come home. But then they almost always say that, it's a question of what they actually get in terms of value. So yeah, I'm glad we had the discussion. I'm glad that people are enjoying it. And yeah, the more we talk about it, yeah, I think it can gradually, maybe someday somebody will get. In terms of the current agitations on the labor market, I don't think it's just UTAG that are currently on strike, but UTAG's strike seems to make most of the headlines because it affects the students in the university.
Okay.
Let us hope that in this week, in the coming week, the government and the UTAG can come to a consensus, because as far as I'm concerned, UTAG met Parliament, and Parliament seems to agree with the position of UTAG. And they definitely have a case, because it's about time that government implements the market premium stuff and all of those things. But we can also understand that government is burdened by its fiscal positions and the financial challenges that it has. It's all about negotiation and coming to an agreement as to whether, and also about trust, I think. So I'm just keeping my fingers crossed, and I hope that this week something good will come out of it. Someone made a comment about lecturers teaching and not giving their all to teaching and stuff like that. Well, I can't speak for everybody. So obviously I will not try. But I will say that a part of this work also has to do with motivation, and I think it cuts across with most employment. You need to be motivated. Sometimes the motivation helps you give everything you have to the job. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, let's just hope for the best. I think eventually things will work out, and the lecturers will return once some of these market premium stuff and those things have been agreed on. Everything should be fine. Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Those participants from the Zoom, if you have anything to say, you could also end your. Oh, sorry, you can on your video, have a bite, 1 minute, and we can close the show. Okay. All right. So thank you so much. We are very much sorry that our internet really disappointed us today from many of the people who were on the show. But nevertheless, it has been a great show with so much input, and especially about the hourly rate. And I think that it is the best way to go, not only for the benefit of the employee, but for the employer as well as also the government. So next week we'll be here. We couldn't touch the night economy or the 24-hour economy. Next week we'll be here, and we'll have that discussion on its own with the same guest. So make a date with us next week, and as we bring you another interesting episode on SEPSA Talk. Thank you very much, and enjoy your evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you are. Bye-bye.